Hello, everyone. This is Carl Elefante, joining you from Washington, D.C. this morning or this evening, depending on where you are. It's a real pleasure to be here today and to be serving as moderator for this panel, which is the Reset Practice and Policy, how professional organizations are making big moves. I'll also have the honor of representing AIA today in this presentation. And it's my delight to be joined here today with Carolyn Pidcock, who represents Architects Declare Australia. Carolyn is Director of Pidcock Architecture and Sustainability based in Sydney. She's a life fellow of the Australian Institute of Architects and a former president of the Australian Institute of Architects in New South Wales and a national councillor. So much of what we're going to achieve in climate action will result from motivating professionals, motivating people to change their behaviors, to do things that they may not already be doing. A lot of this is going to take place because organizations like the two AIAs, the American Institute of Architects and the Australian Institute of Architects, and many other professional organizations like them, will really be working with thousands of people to really get them motivated and prepared to be able to do this work. And fortunately, one of the real advantages that we have, one of the real assets that we're working with, is that we have fantastic members who are doing terrific work today and who are really paving the path forward. Basically, that work happens in two theaters, the area of practice and the area of policy. Of course, practice for the American Institute of Architects is helping our 95,000 members really change the way that they practice and to get focused on decarbonization as something that they can do with every project. And then, of course, the second is working together as organizations to really influence larger scale policy and practices that are at the governmental and industry levels. So with that introduction, I'd like to turn it over to Carolyn Pidcock for her presentation about that AIA, the Australian Institute of Architects, and her representing really Architects Declare Australia. Carolyn?
Thanks a lot, Carl. I'll just share my screen. So firstly, I would like to start by actually acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, and I in particular, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging or the future. Here in Australia, we are lucky enough to have the oldest surviving continuous culture, and they have looked after this place with great care. I was born in Grafton, which is in the northern part of Australia, of New South Wales, in Jamalang on the land of the Bundjalung Nation. And then when I was young, I came to Sydney, where I was raised in Mossman, Cubba, which is the land of the Ku-ring-gai of the Eora Nation, and I now live in Millers Point, Sydney, which is Kudai, land of the Gadigal people. And I thank them for their care and love of the land. This last year has been tumultuous. This time last year we were suffering the worst drought in forever, and the fires that raged across our country were starting in earnest. We've seen the bleaching of the Great Barrier Reef. We've seen fish dying in rivers. We've had dust storms. We've had hailstorms. We've had floods. And then we had COVID. And then we had the whole Black Lives Matter movement, which is not just something America has an issue with. We have a very deep issue, and we've had lockdown. It has been tumultuous. But, you know, I think that one can honestly say that the present moment offers the potential born of crisis to transform the way humans inhabit the earth, because these are not single issue struggles. We don't live in single issue lives. They are all interconnected. And it's such an opportunity to say we're not going back to what was, because what was not good. I think we've just heard this morning about all the issues with the Paris Climate Agreement and the risks between 1.5 and 2, and there's a lot of work to deal with those, and we absolutely need to deal with them. Additionally, we've all signed up for the 17 global goals, which we haven't heard a lot about, but I think a lot of companies in Australia in particular are starting to address these because we have signed up. We are committed, we are legally committed to delivering on all of these, and morally committed as well. I think at the end of last year, various people sort of drew up the gap to see where we were going and where we need to be. And there is a huge gap that needs to be urgently addressed, as was spoken about this morning. So what can architects do? Probably more importantly, what should architects do? Again, we saw this gap that building operations and building materials are responsible for about 39% of CO2 emissions in the world. And as we've been spectacularly lazy, I think, in addressing these in a positive way in the past, the opportunity here is huge. The other great opportunity is that we architects are both creative and logical people. We are so well placed to take this incredible opportunity and do something brilliant with it, and we should. So we started Architects Declare. Thank you to the UK people in the UK who commenced this great movement. As of today, we've got 957 signatories. That's a lot more people than that, because one of those signatories is a company with 300 people in it and another with 600 people. So this represents thousands and thousands of people. What is the Architects Declare movement? It's spontaneous, decentralized, non-hierarchical and disruptive. It's asking each architect to take responsibility for action in their own lives and practices. It's not about telling people what to do, it's about giving people opportunities to do this. It's about inverting the traditional method of advocacy and policy to become a bottoms-up approach to community-led change making. Our vision is to empower architects to create the paradigm shift in our behaviour and take responsibility for action in our lives and practices, each one of us, in a way that the creation of buildings and cities will no longer be the problem, but will be a catalyst towards a regeneration of the planet, so that we can live in a constantly regenerating and self-sustaining world where we collaboratively work towards the health of people and ecosystems. A great future we can make. So 2019 was about Architects Declare, and we decided at the beginning of this 2020 will be about Architects Act. Before we get into what that means, it's really interesting to see to go back to Donella Meadows and her understanding of how we change things. And really the big thing is mindsets. It's not about access to information or changing rules or changing control over rules or goals, it's mindsets. And we kind of took that idea and worked it into a different sort of diagram to talk about what we might need to do for Architects Declare. And it's interesting to talk about whether we should act at small scale or very large scale. Regenerative design, which is very much part of Architects Declare, suggests we work in nested systems, and we need to be working in all of them at all of the time. And we can sort of be doing that simultaneously. As Mary McKillop said, we can't do everything, we can't do nothing, but we can do something. And that's a really important place to start. Another hat I wear is chair of 1 Million Women, which is a fantastic group in Australia that empowers millions of women to live a zero carbon life through their daily choices. And making simple daily choice changes can be very empowering and strive for action. And I think that's kind of a starting point for all of what we need to do in Architects Declare. So at the beginning of this year, we said, okay, we're going to perform triage. Let's go carbon neutral, switch to 100% certified green power, complete a carbon audit on your practice, and then go carbon neutral by the end of the year. We had a fantastic we did put together a whole series of informations about how to do that. Next, now we're continuing the triage. We're to achieve net zero embodied and operational energy for our buildings. And we're about to start 30 buildings in 30 days to sort of show how possible this is and why we should be doing it. We're also working up some tools, and we're borrowing heavily from REBA 2030, America, anyone who's going to lend us a hand. And I think one of the best parts of this whole movement is that everyone is sharing, and that's really great. And then the main game, which is actually to adopt regenerative thinking in your work and everything you do. And I think this is sort of about, this shows you how positive and fabulous regenerative ideas can be, because it's about deeply understanding the systems that you're working in and finding the potential and the energy and allowing those to express themselves rather than trying to control and manage everything, which is not healthy for us or the planet. So how do we make this attainable for architects in Australia? And, you know, perhaps we could seek advice from our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, which is very much part of our Declare movement. And they have this whole idea of love, of caring for country. And most recently, they've, Dylan Combermary at the Government Architects Office in New South Wales has developed a whole paper on designing with country. And designing with country is about understanding nature, people, and bringing design into it and creating, responding in ways that we care for country, and country will then care for us. This will be soon embedded into all of the policy within New South Wales, which is really exciting. We're also hoping to learn from Australia. Most companies are doing reconciliation action plans to try and work out how to reconcile our relationship with our Indigenous people. And they have different ways of, there's scoping, implementing, embedding, and leadership, which is called Reflect, Innovate, Stretch, and Elevate, which is a beautiful way of sort of thinking when you're on your journey that you don't have to be perfect to start with, but you've just got to get started. We're also working with the Australian Built Environment Declaration Working Group, the engineers, the architects, builders and planners, and anyone else who wants to join us. The engineers have got some really great ideas about their structure and ways of different groups to organise thematic, regional, initiative and enabler. And we're borrowing that idea for helping structure us as well. And then importantly, we're also part of this group called Better Futures Australia, which is where, here we are, the built environment right down the bottom, but we're part of a huge number of people in Australia. And I think it's so critical at this time when our government is not acknowledging the importance of this, to get everyone together to say, this is what we need to do. This is what we as a people demand you to do, and we need it done now. So if not us, who? And if not now, when? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. That was fantastic. I'm going to spend the next few minutes, I'm going to share my screen and, really represent the work that AIA has been doing over the last couple of years in relationship to this incredibly important topic as well. And let me do that. Hopefully that worked. And
looks good.
You're seeing my screen. So the American Institute of Architects is a 162-year-old organization with 95,000 members. That's a very large group of people, and there's obviously a heck of a lot of history in 162 years. What's happened over the last couple of years is pretty remarkable as a transition for, frankly, a tradition that's been going on for so many decades. And there's a lot of things that have sort of added up to make this moment happen. One point in time is to literally just point at about a year ago when the members of AIA came to the National Convention in 2019 and presented a resolution for urgent and sustained climate action and a real commitment from the Institute. And it very much resonates with what Carolyn was saying in this going from declaring to action mode. And for AIA, really there were three things that were set into motion very quickly when that happened in 2019. So the first is literally the declare part. It is time for AIA to step up and say, this is it. This is the priority that we have to have as an institute. The second was for us to redefine what we consider design excellence to be, and to essentially no longer consider design that is not climate appropriate design as being excellent design. There's no such thing as good design that isn't also responsive to this climate need. And then last but not least was to then make a plan and implement that plan. The declare part of it literally took place later on that year with this pretty simple but pretty powerful statement that we really recognize that the world is our site, that all of these challenges that we face are linked, that time matters, it is urgent, we need to get busy, that literally all the people of the world are our clients. It's not just the people who are writing us checks to do projects, and that this is literally why we exist as an organization and as a profession. So it's time for us, with the reputation and the resources that the largest national design organization in the world has, to tackle this ultimate design problem. And that we're really determined to make a difference. And so that statement has become known around the AIA as the big move. And there's two things about that in the world of the American Institute of Architects are significant. The first is big and the second is move. And we're a big organization. It's hard to change things around. It really takes a concerted effort. So what's really kind of brought this threshold moment about? And I just want to point to a few things that I think help understand sort of different aspects of the personality that came about and really made this happen. The first is the change to our code of ethics and really updating the sustainability dimension of it to literally include climate action as one of the things that is necessary for the ethical practice of architecture. The second was also in 2018, we constituted a group called the Blue Ribbon Panel on Codes and Standards, which essentially said it is time for us to have codes that say zero carbon. And it's time for us to have standards that are for zero carbon. That needs to be the baseline, not an aspirational goal. And the Blue Ribbon Panel produced a document that is called Disruption, Evolution, and Change. And the other aspect of it that I think is important to understand is that it also questioned our definitions, which literally date back to 162 years of AIA's history, to what it means to protect public health, safety, and welfare. What is protecting health, safety, and welfare in the era of climate change? Climate action needs to be part of it. It needs to be the driver behind it. Next was the support of Architecture 2030 and others in creating a model zero code that we then worked together to be adopted by the International Code Committee to be part of the 2021 code cycle. The beauty of that, I mean, this is really something to look into, but the beauty of this zero code, it is completely implementable today. That we don't have to wait for some technological revolution. We don't need to wait for some new design paradigm to be able to do this. We can do it today. We have architects that are doing it today in their work. We just simply need to make it the standard. I already mentioned the resolution, which expressed the interest of our membership. The little box here with 4,860 yeses, 312 noes, and 28 abstentions. I don't know how you abstain or object to this resolution, but it passed overwhelmingly with the support of the membership. So the 2019 president really took this on, Bill Bates from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and said, let's really take this. Let's make the needle move. Let's make progress with this, and really brought about this series of actions that I'm going to talk a little bit more about. So I said, first declare. So you saw the big move statement. We declared it. This is it. It's time for us to make this big move on climate change. Design excellence, defining design excellence as climate action and sustainable and regenerative design is encapsulated really in adopting the Committee on the Environment measures of environmental stewardship excellence as the design excellence framework for all AIA work. All design awards are measured by these 10 measures. And then the development of the AIA specific action plan for our institute. What does our institute really need to do? And not surprisingly, it addresses, really understanding how to mitigate the sources. How are we part of the problem? Really understanding how we need to adapt to a climate world, a climate change world, and what it means in terms of a new design mode. And then really catalyzing us as an organization and architects as a profession. And it also then was included into and really became the driving force for our new strategic plan, our 2021 to 25 strategic plan. And those of you who know the AIA probably know, because of Ed Mazaria's influence going back to 2005, that we created the AIA 2030 Commitment Program, which is meeting the Architecture 2030 challenge by adhering to the kind of guidelines of the Architecture 2030 commitment, the AIA 2030 commitment. This is building. There are over 2 billion square feet of buildings that were reported last year. I wish I could say the number of firms was higher, but it really shows you the importance of these leadership firms, many of whom we're hearing from as part of this program, who are really having an influence, not just in their practices, not just in the United States, but literally around the world. Over 1 billion square feet of space was reported through the 2030 commitment last year, not in the United States of America, outside of the United States of America. And the last thing I'll say about this is that, again, this sense that there's not a difference between good design and climate appropriate design, sustainable and regenerative design, that we must consider that as what good design means. And the firms that have been awarded the firm award by the American Institute of Architects are all members of the 2030 commitment. Many of them, in fact, pretty much this whole list here has at least multiple AIA Top 10 award-winning projects. This is our commitment to what new design is and what good design is in the future. And that's my presentation. And I will stop sharing my screen. And Caroline, come back on camera.
Hi there.
And let's talk.
It's fantastic what you're doing, Carl. It's so great.
That's what I was going to say to you.
and I can say, I've sort of, because I wasn't asked to talk, the Institute of Architects here in Australia are doing some fantastic things. Helen Lockhead, who's just stepped down, was leading fabulously in that way and have made a number of commitments. We're following absolutely in your footsteps, I hope, but we aren't, the Institute's not quite as advanced as you guys are, but it's great to have the leadership you're offering.
Well, I have to say that listening to you, we oftentimes talk about what we can do to try to be a more nimble organization. Yeah. We're with 95,000 members with 160 plus years of history. That's a real challenge. It's very hard to really set a new direction and really change our course. And one of the things that I was so impressed with your presentation was just really how quick and nimble you are, and how quick you are to sort of engage partners and so on. It's very impressive, just this very focused, very active activity.
Well, you know, you've got a very big ship to turn around, but you've done it, which is amazing. I think what's worked well with us is to have, you know, we can be much more radical than an existing organisation with a whole lot of members who might not all agree, but we can kind of, and I think they work really well together. And I know that the Institute has been very open to that, which is really important. And I think in the UK, where this all started, or the Declare movement started, they've got another group called ACAN, which is Architects Climate Action Network, which are the younger architects, and they're even more nimble, because guess what? It's their future that we're talking about. And they are really sort of activating for even stronger change and making sure, and it's fantastic to have them, because they're kind of making the architects declare signatories, you know, do what they've signed up for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that I see that's really has a lot of traction for the architects in the United States is that it's so clear, not just that this is needed, but that it's wanted.
Yeah.
That this is a way to make better buildings, you know. And on so many different levels. And it's also something that we can do. We have the tools to do it with.
Oh, look, we've got all the tools, we've got all the technology, we've got all of that. We just need to think much more regeneratively and much more like our First Nations people did think, and bring that forward into a 21st century, but just sort of really understand that when we understand and care for the country and work with her rather than against her, it's a beautiful way of realizing much better places where more of us want to live and can live healthy and joyful and resilient lives. You know, it's I think we got a bit waylaid in that modernistic idea of sort of man can conquer the world and build and contain and control nature. Yeah, we've got a bit of unlearning to do, I think.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I'm also curious as to how you think the coronavirus pandemic has changed people's thinking and given a sort of a sense of urgency.
Well, I think the best thing that it's done is show that we can turn on a dime. You know, we can actually, all these people who suddenly worked from home, and for years we've been saying can't do it, can't do that. I think a whole lot of taboos, well, here in Australia, things that, oh, you can't do that, were just done, and government listened to the scientific experts and acted on that. That was fantastic to see. And I think that you know, that what was shown is that we can do things differently, and when we do them differently, there can be a whole lot of benefits. So I think that disruption and that unsettling has also put people into a much better place for reimagining what is the new normal and what we need to work out going forward. And it's got to be the other thing was that I think here in Australia, because we all went into lockdown, that one of the things we were able to do was go for a walk in nature, and so many people reconnected with that and said we've got to get much more nature absolutely embedded into our cities, and we've got to do this better next time.
So another thing we have to do is figure out how to make 30 minutes extend for a longer period. This has been a wonderful conversation. Thanks so much for your presentation. I really appreciate it. Thanks
Pleasure,
so much.
Carl, and thank you for your leadership.